February 12, 1945, the Ruhr Pocket, Western Germany. The report landed on the desk of General Omar Bradley at 0800 hours. It was marked classified. It described an incident that defied military logic. During the previous night, a night of total pitch-black darkness with zero moon, an entire American reconnaissance patrol had been wiped out. There were no survivors, but the recovery team found something that chilled their blood. Every single soldier had been shot directly in the head. There were no flares used, no searchlights, no muzzle flashes were reported by nearby units. The physics were impossible. How can a sniper hit a moving target between the eyes from 200 yards away in absolute darkness? The American commanders initially blamed friendly fire or luck. They refused to believe the alternative. They refused to believe the whispers coming from the terrified infantrymen on the front lines. The soldiers claimed that the Germans had developed a way to see without light. They claimed that the darkness itself was watching them. They didn't know it yet, but they were facing the world's first night hunters, the vampires, and for the next few weeks, the night belonged to them. To understand the terror of the vampire attacks, we must look at the psychological state of the U.S. Army in early 1945. The Battle of the Bulge was over. The Allies were winning. The German army was supposed to be broken, lacking fuel, ammunition, and morale. The 5th Infantry Division was moving through the dense woodlands near the Sieg River. It was supposed to be a mopping-up operation. Captain James Miller led King Company. His men were veterans. They knew how to fight. They knew the sounds of war, the rip of the MG-42, the scream of the Nebelwerfer rockets. But they didn't know the sound of silence. On the night of February 10th, Miller established a perimeter in a ruined village. He posted sentries in pairs. He ordered strict light discipline. No cigarettes, no fires. The night was absolute. Heavy clouds blocked the stars. Visibility was less than 5 feet. In conditions like this, combat usually stops. You can't see what you can't see. Miller sat in the basement of a farmhouse, checking his map by a red flashlight. He felt safe. The darkness was usually the soldier's friend, a blanket that hid you from the enemy. But at 02, the radio operator, Corporal Evans, tapped him on the shoulder. "Captain," Evans whispered, "Post 3 missed their check-in." Frowned Miller. "Probably asleep or radio trouble." "Post 2 missed it 10 minutes ago, sir. I didn't want to wake you, but now 3 is gone too." 2 posts gone, in silence. Miller felt a cold knot in his stomach. He grabbed his Thompson. "Wake the platoon," Miller ordered. "We have visitors." Miller took a squad out to check the perimeter. They moved slowly, hands on the shoulders of the man in front to keep from getting lost in the black void. They reached the foxhole of Post 2. "Jones? Smith?" Miller whispered. No answer. He reached down into the hole. His hand touched wet wool. He turned on his flashlight for a split second, shielding the beam. The 2 sentries were sitting upright. Their eyes were open. Between their eyes, in the center of their foreheads, were small, dark holes. There was no struggle, no signs of panic. They had died instantly, without ever raising their rifles. "Snipers," Miller hissed. "Get down." The squad dropped to the snow. But where was the sniper? To make that shot in daylight is hard. To make it at night, through fog and trees, is impossible. Unless the enemy could see heat. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the woods. A strange, high-pitched whine, like an electric capacitor charging up. Zzz. It came from the darkness ahead. "What is that?" a private asked, his voice cracking. Then a single shot. Crack! The soldier next to Miller jerked back. His helmet flew off. He fell dead. There was no muzzle flash. The shot came from nowhere. "They can see us!" Miller screamed. "Pop flares! Give me light!" A mortar team fired an illumination round. Pop! The flare drifted down on a parachute, bathing the forest in harsh, swinging white light. For 20 seconds the shadows retreated. And then Miller saw them. About 150 yards away, standing near the tree line, were figures. They looked like German soldiers, but they were wrong. They carried massive, bulky backpacks that looked like metal boxes. And on their rifles, the STG-44 assault rifles, were enormous, telescope-like tubes. The tubes were connected by thick cables to the backpacks. To the Americans of 1945, they looked like spacemen or deep-sea divers lost in the woods. "What are those things?" Evans yelled. The Germans didn't run. They didn't take cover. One of them turned his massive scope towards the flare. The light blinded his sensitive equipment. He recoiled, covering his face. But the others lowered their weapons. The flare was burning out. As the light faded and darkness returned, the strange electric whine started again. Zzz. The darkness was their water, and they were the sharks. Miller realized his mistake. The flare had given away their position, but it had only temporarily blinded the enemy. Now the light was gone, and the Americans were blind again. But the enemy had just turned their eyes back on. As the flare fizzled out on the forest floor, the darkness returned instantly. It was heavier than before. "Pull back!" Captain Miller screamed. "Fall back to the ridge!" The platoon scrambled up the muddy slope. They were running blind. They tripped over roots, slammed into trees. But the Germans didn't run. They walked. Through their infrared scopes, the American soldiers glowed like ghosts. The Zielgerät 1229 Vampir scope converted heat signatures into a visible image. The German snipers didn't need to hurry. They picked their targets. Snap! A corporal running next to Miller dropped mid-stride. Snap! Another man fell, shot through the back. There was no muzzle flash to return fire at, just the sound of bullets hitting flesh and the electric hum of the German power packs. Zzz. Miller fired his Thompson blindly behind him, spraying the woods. It was useless. He was fighting the night itself. By the time they reached the safety of the American lines, King Company had lost 18 men. They hadn't seen a single enemy soldier with their naked eyes. 0600 hours, Battalion HQ. Captain Miller stood before Lieutenant Colonel Henderson. Miller was covered in mud. His eyes were bloodshot. He slammed his helmet on the table. "They have night vision, Colonel. They have scopes that see in the dark." Colonel Henderson poured himself a cup of coffee. He looked at Miller with pity, not belief. "Captain," Henderson said calmly, "you've been on the line for 3 weeks. You're exhausted. Battle fatigue makes men see things." "I didn't see things," Miller shouted. "I saw men with telescopes on their rifles. They carried backpacks with cables." The colonel laughed softly. "Telescopes? In the dark? Listen to yourself, son. That's science fiction. The crowds are desperate. They're probably just using pre-sighted kill zones. Go get some sleep." Miller walked out of the tent. He knew what he saw, and he knew that if they went back out there tonight, they were all dead men. The disconnect between the command tent and the foxhole was fatal. Back at the front line, the word spread. The Germans can see in the dark. It broke the men. Soldiers refused to sleep. They sat in their foxholes, staring into the shadows until their eyes watered. A deer stepped on a twig. Bang! A terrified private emptied his entire M1 Garand clip into a bush. "I saw him! I saw his eyes glowing!" the private screamed. It was hysteria. The platoon was unraveling. They weren't fighting the Germans anymore. They were fighting their own imagination. Every shadow was a vampire. Every sound was a sniper. Miller watched his men. They were shaking. If the Germans attacked tonight, the line would crumble from fear alone.
1400 hours. A black Jeep pulled up to Miller's position. It didn't have unit markings. A man stepped out. He wore a trench coat over a uniform with no rank insignia. He walked straight to Miller. "Captain Miller?" the man asked. "I'm Major Black from OSS Technical Intelligence. I read your report." "The colonel threw it in the trash," Miller said. "The colonel is an idiot," Black replied. He opened a briefcase. He pulled out a grainy photograph. It showed a German soldier carrying a massive backpack and a rifle with a large scope. "Is this what you saw?" Black asked. Miller froze. "Yes, that's it. What the hell is it?" "It's code-named Vampir. Zielgerät 29. Active infrared night vision. It's not magic, Captain. It's technology, and we have to capture one intact before the Russians do." Miller looked at the photo. The monster had a name, and now they had a mission. Major Black laid a heavy crate on the snow. He opened it. Inside were M25 magnesium flares and a set of modified Jeep headlights wired to a car battery. These scopes amplify light. They turn night into day, but that is their weakness. If you hit them with intense, sudden brightness, it's like staring into the sun with binoculars. The plan was simple, but suicidal. They needed to lure the vampires in. They needed bait. Captain Miller looked at his men. They were terrified, but they were angry. They wanted revenge for their dead friends. "I'll be the bait," Captain Miller said. He set up a position in the center of the clearing. He sat there, exposed, smoking a cigarette, the ultimate target. Around him, in the snowdrifts, his men waited. They weren't holding rifles. They were holding the tripwires to the flares. It was a game of chicken. Who would flinch first? The sound returned. Zzz. The electric hum of the battery packs. The Nachtjäger, night hunters, were coming. Miller didn't move. He felt the crosshairs on his chest. He knew that a German sniper was looking at him right now through a green, ghostly lens, squeezing the trigger. "Now!" Miller screamed. His men pulled the wires. Whoosh! 6 magnesium flares ignited simultaneously. The Jeep headlights snapped on. The clearing went from pitch black to blinding, searing white in a microsecond. A scream echoed from the tree line. It was a scream of agony. The German snipers, looking through their sensitive scopes, were blinded. The sudden overload burned the retinas of their eyes and shorted out the cathode tubes in the devices. The vampires stumbled out of the trees, clawing at their faces, dropping their rifles. "Get them!" Miller yelled. The Americans charged. This is where the German technology failed them. The Zielgerät 1229 system was a marvel, but it was heavy. The wooden box battery backpack, Gasmaskenbehälter, weighed 30 pounds. The scope and lamp added another 5 pounds to the rifle. The German snipers were top-heavy and slow. They tried to run, but they stumbled in the deep snow. Miller tackled the lead sniper. The German fell backward like a turtle on its shell. The heavy battery pack pinned him to the ground. He tried to swing his rifle, but the scope was too bulky for close combat. Miller didn't shoot him. He smashed the butt of his Thompson into his German's face. He ripped the massive scope off the rifle. "Got one!" Miller shouted. "I got the hardware!" The surviving Germans retreated, firing blindly into the light. Major Black, the OSS agent, ran up to the captured equipment. He examined the scope. The lens was cracked, but the electronics were intact. "This is it," Black said, his hands shaking. "This changes everything. We own the night now."
but the cost was high. As the adrenaline faded, Miller looked around. 3 of his men were dead, hit in the initial exchange before the flares went off. The snow was stained with oil from the broken German lamps and blood from American veins. Miller looked at the captured Vampir device. It looked ugly, crude, and dangerous. "Get it out of here," Miller spat, "before more of them show up." They retreated into the dawn, carrying the secret that would eventually become the foundation of modern night warfare. March 19, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. The captured Vampir device didn't stay in Europe. It was flown immediately to the U.S. Army's Secret Research Division under Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe Secret Technology. American scientists placed the scope on a clean white table. They took it apart, screw by screw. What they found inside terrified them. The Germans had miniaturized a cathode ray tube. They had created an infrared spotlight that was invisible to the naked eye, but lit up the world like a stadium for the shooter. "This is 20 years ahead of us," one scientist noted in a classified report. "If they had mass-produced this in 1942, the war might have ended differently." But they didn't. Only 310 units were ever delivered to the front. The Vampir was a masterpiece of engineering, but a failure of logistics. The batteries ran out in 15 minutes. The bulbs shattered in the cold. It was a Wunderwaffe, a wonder weapon, that arrived too late to save the dying Reich. The war ended. The Nazis surrendered. But the technology didn't die. It evolved. The blueprints from the Vampir became the foundation for the U.S. Army's night vision program. First came the heavy snooper scopes in the Korean War, then the green starlight scopes in Vietnam. Today, every U.S. special operator wears panoramic night vision goggles, GPNVG-18, that turn night into day. When a Navy SEAL raids a compound in total darkness, he is looking through the great-grandchild of the device Captain Miller captured in the snow. The Germans invented the concept, the Americans perfected it. And now, "We own the night" is the motto of the U.S. military. But it started with blood on the frozen ground of the Ruhr Pocket.
Captain Miller survived the war. He returned to his home in Ohio. He became a father, then a grandfather. He lived a peaceful life. But his family noticed something strange. Miller never slept in total darkness. He always kept a small nightlight burning in the hallway, and he kept a flashlight on his nightstand. When his grandson asked him why, Miller didn't talk about politics or strategy. He just said, "The dark isn't empty, son. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't watching you." Miller knew the truth. Technology changes, uniforms change, but the fear of the invisible enemy, that never changes. If this story of the First Shadow War fascinated you, hit that like button, subscribe. We shine a light on the history that was hidden in the dark. Operation Vampir was a warning. It showed us that the next war would not be fought with eyes, but with sensors. The night is no longer a sanctuary, it is a battlefield. Thank you for watching. Stay in the light.